Hello and welcome to The Brand Called You. I'm your host, Sandeep Tyagi, and the brand we are speaking to today is Rob Panepinto. He's the managing partner of Govo Venture Partners. He serves many other roles, including Director of Innovation Districts Strategy at UCF, CEO of Entrepreneurs in Action, several other board and advisory positions. Welcome to our show, Rob.
Thanks, Sandeep. Great to be here.
Well, you're involved in a very wide array of companies and institutions. Where do you spend most of your time? What's kind of the primary activity?
Well, all of it has to do with working with entrepreneurs. So regardless of which, I call them hats, regardless of which hat I have on, it in almost every case is working with an early stage entrepreneur to scale their business. So that may be as an investor, that may be as a mentor, that may be as someone running an accelerator program. Depending upon which hat, it may be for entrepreneurs that are in regulated industries or govtech companies. If I'm wearing my Entrepreneurs in Action hat, then they're going to be social enterprises, companies that have a social impact. But almost all of it circulates around working with entrepreneurs to help scale their business.
So that's the common thread. That's what ties it together.
Sure.
Govo Venture Partner sounds obviously like where you are providing funding into the companies, and the combination with UCF and Entrepreneurs in Action. Are these different aspects? One of them is GovTech. One of them, of course, UCF is the biggest university in the country. So there's probably a lot of activity there as well.
Yeah, so the role UCF, where I help on a part-time basis run our business incubators, particularly focusing in our innovation areas, those are going to be cross-vertical. It does cluster around the innovation industries in Central Florida, which in one area is healthcare, in one area is defense and cybersecurity and augmented reality and virtual reality. Might be fintech in another area. At EIA, which is tied to another accelerator I helped launch several years ago called Rally, which is actually an international program that I'm very proud of. All of those companies need to be social enterprises. So that's an investment fund that invests in early stage social enterprise companies, which for us means that they have both a sustainable revenue model and a measurable social impact, and obviously they're investable. It is a venture fund. Govo Venture Partners, which we launched last year, has a different investment thesis. That one is centered around companies that are in regulated industries, again, early stage, or those selling to government. Although interestingly, there wasn't by design, but there's a lot of overlap between the impact piece and the government piece, because government, at least in the United States, is heavily involved as either an accelerant or a brake to some of these impact areas. So perfect example would be really anything in any of green energy or environmental sustainability. Government's heavily involved in that. So you have these entrepreneurs creating these innovative products, and government in many cases right now is actually an innovation tailwind through funding and other programs. So that's one where it's kind of crosses a couple of different things that I'm involved in.
How did you come up with this passion focus of yours, which seems like the intersection of entrepreneurship, social impact, and GovTech? Is there a story here? What made you think that this is where I want to spend my energy?
I think it's an evolution, Sandeep. I wish, right? Life tends not to be one magical moment. It's how you build on a series of them. So I didn't know this at the time, but I will say that I think the sort of belief that business is and should be a force for good, regardless of scale, regardless of industry, I think was embedded in me, because my stepdad was a Main Street business guy. He owned a couple of pharmacies. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and he owned some independent pharmacies there when there were more of those sorts of things. And I saw the impact of the shopkeeper, Main Street business guy or gal there. He hired a lot of the kids in the neighborhood. It was not a great, these were some tough neighborhoods in Brooklyn where he had the stores. And it was back in the days where if the mom couldn't afford the medicine for that week, because less people even had health insurance then, it'd be one of those, don't worry about it, you'll pay me next week, your kid needs the medicine. So I mean, I saw that. And so as I began my business career, and particularly my work at the company I was with most of the time, Magnetics and then Connections, I became a product of scalable entrepreneurship. And I saw the power of that business in our community as we grew from a very small company to a fairly large one. And as I moved into leadership in the company, started to establish myself as getting involved in more things in the community. And so I think those things just built. And then after we sold the company later, and then I exited after that, by that time I was very involved in the community. I was looking at how communities had built innovation, how they had really advanced opportunity for people in their communities. And to me, entrepreneurship was always at the center of it. And at that point, I made a decision not to do another startup on my own or join some of my other partners in a startup, but to help others who were starting up their businesses. And that's led to really the last 10 years of what I've done post my exit at my company. So
Fantastic give back to the community. No,
right.
That's great.
Yeah. And so I think I started with the premise that scalable entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs and business owners should have a positive impact on their community.
Mm-hmm.
And then sort of the last leap on there was, well, what about the entrepreneurs who by their very nature are creating things that have an impact? And that's how I got heavily involved in social enterprise and social impact specifically. So to me, it was just a sort of an evolution of what I already felt about what entrepreneurship and business for good could be. And then moving it to that next step.
Over this tenure, has your faith that social impact can be driven through entrepreneurship and business, has it strengthened or weakened? ESG is a big trend, and in investing, I see two schools emerging. One set of guys says it doesn't work. You can't mix the objectives. And a lot of misrepresentation, miscounting happens to make it look like good on ESG terms. I'm curious, as you have been at the interface, has that belief strengthened over 10 years?
So it's interesting, you and I are both in an organization called YPO, and I just came back from a YPO Global Impact Summit in Costa Rica about 2 weeks ago. And there was a lot of this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say on the entrepreneurship side, I am more confident because I think this next generation of entrepreneurs, they are coming to their business lives with impact being part of what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it may be just what we would call corporate social responsibility. I'm going to give a portion of my profits to a charity. And I think that's the one where there's a little bit of a rub with shareholders and other things, right? Because you are taking money from the business and doing some good with it.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the pure aspects of social entrepreneurship are that what the business does itself helps solve the problem. That to me, I am more confident in, both in terms of its ability to be investable and make money, and its ability to make an impact. I do think that there is a little bit of this ESG stuff that is, I don't want to call it show because that would not be the right word. But there's a little to check the box stuff, and I'm less interested in the check the box and much more interested in the company. I'll give an example of a company that I actually have an investment in that's using NASA-based technologies to clean waterways of PCBs and PFAS. I'm much more interested in that type of ESG than I am in saying, I've got this investment strategy or I'm doing this. But I do think for the most part, people are coming from a very good place, and so however people feel like they can make their impact. God bless.
Yeah, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. Now, and entrepreneurship in our society is now very much celebrated. It is, whether you look at popular culture, you look at for last 30 years or so, since maybe the internet age, it has become the big deal. It has been the success path that a lot of young people dream about. Do you think it's the right path for pretty much everyone? I know you have a couple of daughters who are also at that age where they're looking at careers. I have two kids as well, and I have these conversations. Do you guide some people and say this is the right path for you, and you look at some people and say you shouldn't be thinking about this? How do you think about that?
I don't think there's no one way for anybody to do anything. So let's just, right, maybe people find their own path. And again, you can be part of an entrepreneurial journey without necessarily being the entrepreneur. I mean, when I joined my company, I was not the founder of that company. I was part of the founding executive team, ultimately got to invest in it, became an owner in the company, ran the company for a period of time, but I wasn't the guy or gal at the beginning. In other things I've been involved in now, I have been, right? And I do think that there is definitely a mindset, a tolerance around risk, a certain personality type, this sort of this push and pull between absolute confidence in what you're doing up until the point you recognize that you need to change and pivot, right? So confidence yet flexibility. There are some unique traits there that don't necessarily fit everyone. Listen, in my life, it has created, certainly, it's created some personal wealth, but more importantly, it's created some freedom and some flexibility to allow me to do other things in my life, which I, for certainty, would not have been able to do otherwise. And so for me, that's a very powerful path, but it clearly isn't for everybody.
So risk tolerance, flexibility. If you have these attributes, they're essential. Anything else that comes to your mind as a checklist?
What was the first thing you said, Sandeep?
Risk tolerance,
yeah,
and flexibility are two things I picked up, as you said, are things that an entrepreneur should have. But do you see some characteristic about a young person that also makes them stand out? Have you interacted with, I presume, dozens, if not hundreds of entrepreneurs? To predict their eventual success, is there a pattern you have observed?
Yeah. Well, listen, there clearly needs to be passion, right? Because you're going to get hit in the head an awful lot, and if you're not committed and passionate about what you're doing, then you're going to give up, right? You're going to give up at a first obstacle or a second obstacle, and you need to get to the other side. I do think too, there's also a certain element of discipline. And this is where kind of the celebrity part of entrepreneurship, I think, is a little concerning. When someone announces, for example, someone announces an exit, there's this assumption that the business existed for like 6 months or a year. Yeah. Well, in the case of the company I was involved in, I mean, I was there for 18 years.
Right.
Right. And so there is a commitment to something for a longer term, a patience, a discipline, which it sometimes is sort of counterintuitive to how people think of the celebrity entrepreneur, that, oh, you just do stuff and it just kind of happens. Well, sometimes that happens, but usually it doesn't, right? So there has to be, that's why I think the passion of it really matters, because to do something for the long haul like that, you better be passionate about it. The flexibility one, to me too, I think is a really important one, because I think you will find not just flexibility of the business model, but flexibility of yourself. Because as the business evolves, your role as that entrepreneur changes, right? In some companies, the CEO at the beginning is the CEO at the end. In some cases, not, right? There are changes, right? You move to chairman, or you exit the company, or you move to founder, or you change a different role based on what the business needs at that point. So so it's not, entrepreneurship is not the straight line sometimes that someone might think in looking at it from a media story.
Sure, yeah. And this passion, or I think what the way you described it, the word that was popping in my head was really more grit, just perseverance and saying, I'm going to make this work. That's very important attribute in any journey, certainly from my personal experience as well.
But I say that, again, but there's gotta be a little bit of it, which is why it's hard, right? Because you have to be confident in what you're doing, but humble enough to realize you may not be the smartest girl or gal in the room, and you may have to change and pivot. And that's a tough, right? That sort of internal confidence, but also to not have that move into stubbornness or arrogance,
Right.
which you also see in some entrepreneurs, which is why sometimes they don't scale, right? Because they sort of can't get past
Their own
beliefs.
ego confines of this is the way I do this.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, well, I'm going to change over to another one of your interests. I know you have an interest in governance and politics, and participated in the county politics of Orange County in Orlando area. Tell us, how did you come about that this would be a good thing to do? I mean, obviously, a couple of famous examples from business going into politics, including one of our most recent presidents, but not a common one. I don't see a lot of people picking this path. So how did you come up with saying, this is something I'm going to spend time on?
Like a lot of things, it comes out of frustration or so by this was in 2018. It was the 2018 election. So I made this decision in 2017, and by that time I was pretty actively involved in a host of community issues. A lot of them around entrepreneurship, but increasingly I've been involved in some things around affordable housing, and most people watching this will not be from Orlando, and so their perception of Orlando is probably one of the theme parks and a vacation destination. And the impact of that to those of us who live here is folks may not know this, is if you look at the average wages in the top 50 cities in the United States, Orlando's generally 49th or 50th. Vegas is sort of the other one, right? Very similar type of economy. And that leads to a whole host of downstream issues. And I got a little frustrated from the places that I was engaged, which were mainly in the nonprofit sector and community-based organizations, about the impact that I could make. I felt that I did have a different approach, and I was frustrated by, particularly in some of these areas, that we just kept talking about the same things and the same solutions, and none of it was moving forward, or certainly at a pace that made me feel very comfortable at that moment in time. And so I just felt uncomfortable with what I felt I could do in the community from the places the seats that I was in. And so I decided to run for mayor.
Yeah. Now, interesting you say that, because as a business leader, especially as a CEO, if you find a problem or you see an opportunity, it seems like that there is a relatively straight line way to get and address that opportunity or change, but not so in politics.
No, I learned that. Yeah.
Well, first of all, you got to get into that position, which is certainly not necessarily a skill that you don't get elected in an entrepreneurship or a corporate role. You do have to get elected in a political role. Yeah. So would you say, what parts of your business experience help you do well in political path? And what parts do you say, well, I got to really think about it differently?
Yeah. So the public elements of it, speaking in large groups, talking to people one-on-one, I was always very comfortable with that. And so I think that came from the type of business roles that I have, where I was always very front-facing, right? Whether I was used to talking to clients or investors or our employees. So that came rather naturally to me. And I'd done a fair amount of public speaking. So that was easy. And again, I think the community, from my perspective, needed some different ways of approaching things. So I certainly believe that some of the things that I proposed, some of which actually have, in varying degrees, have been picked up or at least talked about more so than when before I ran. my business career prepared me for that, right? Those solutions definitely came from a business mind.
Mhm.
The things that I think you learn is just the number of how many different constituencies there are,
Mm.
and which is very different than a business. There just aren't that many, and their needs are so different, and their concerns are so different. And so it may be that the biggest issue. I mean, I ran on we have to transform this economy. If people can't make more money here, we'll never solve our other problems. And we're going to lose our best talent. Kids are going to leave. But it was all about the primary point was around innovation in the economy, and then housing was number two. And while those issues are important broadly, when you knock on someone's door, the thing that's most important to them may be entirely different,
Mhm.
right? It may be the road sign around the corner. You know, why is there not a traffic light over there? My kid's going to school every day and dodging traffic. I could care less whether you want to bring in 200 technology jobs or build an affordable housing complex. I can't even, my kids can't even safely cross the street. And unless you're in that, you're not prepared for that. So it took me a while to sort of have to then come up with solutions for a whole host of things that are the day-to-day function of government. And maybe at the macro level, not the most pressing thing, but at the micro level, in terms of people's lives, super important. So there was a complexity of issues there that definitely took some time. And so when someone asked me for advice about running for office, that's one of the first things I tell them. Get yourself into some of these neighborhoods, start really understand the constituents. The top line issues are easy to figure out, but at the end of the day, you may not be sure what little thing that is super important to that voter, to your point, that you need to get elected to do any of these other things that you want to do.
Yeah, no, great point. Again, contrasting a business, you put your blinkers on, you have a customer need, you identify that's your segment, and you go for it. In politics, you can't say, I'm going to become the mayor of people who want innovation or business. You got to be the mayor of the whole county or governor or whatever it is you're going for, and that's a broader constituency. Yeah, that's an interesting learning. Thank you, Rob.
The other thing I learned too, I learned a lot about the mechanics of it. I learned the importance of someone knowing who you are, having nothing to do with your message. And the difficulty in trying to get people to know who you are. Now, there is a business component of that, right? As you're trying to say, introduce a brand. But I remember we'd run some polling, and in a generic polling, I would always win, right? So the generic polling, would you prefer to vote for, a successful business person who's involved in the community on these issues, or a 20-year public servant who had served in a law enforcement role? Because I was running against the sheriff, who's now the current mayor. And in a generic ballot, the business guy would always win. But you don't vote for a generic person, right? So here was this guy, Rob Panepinto, who entered this race with probably 2% name ID. I mean, who knew me?
Yeah.
Against the guy who had, I think, 85% name ID and was well liked, and deservedly so. He'd been a successful sheriff for 20 years. So you also learn that, you learn some interesting things about the business of that business.
Yes.
It is a business.
Name recognition, which is why
Branding, right?
film actors do seem to have, and at least some of the very successful ones have been coming from that background, because they at least have that feel.
Right, which is why most of the business guys in politics have either been people that are already known or are willing to take huge percentages of their personal wealth to make themselves known. Right?
Yes, interesting.
Yeah.
Let's change over to some personal journey. Tell us about your childhood. You already mentioned you grew up in Brooklyn and had some experiences there. What was that like? How did it shape you to what you've become?
Yeah, I mean, I had a pretty standard, I think, middle class suburban upbringing. My parents got divorced at a young age. I was fortunate enough to have a great dad, and then my mom had a successful second marriage. I don't think there are not a lot of things, honestly, that I
That's okay.
take from it.
So it was like a nice, regular, that didn't leave big. I mean, of course, everybody is shaped by it, but nothing comes to your mind right now. Let me ask you about some advice, some conversation that you may recall that shaped you or helped you make a big decision. Did you, a teacher or a parent or a friend, tell you something that really shaped you?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple. So after I graduated, I had taken a job at a company at night while I was in my senior year in college. And I decided to take a year off between undergrad and grad school. And so I went to work for the company in their sales department during the day. And then I left and I went to grad school. And I came out of grad school, and the entrepreneur who ran that company said, "Hey, come on over, let's grab lunch." And I walked in there and I was 21, 22. He said, "What are you gonna, now you got your master's degree, fancy pants. What are you gonna do?" And I said, "Well, I'm gonna go, I was gonna go consult, I'm gonna do this." And he sort of looked back at me, shifted in his seat, and he did me one of these, and he said, "Really? You're gonna consult?" Because what the F are you gonna consult to anybody about? Because what the hell do you know? He said, "You want to learn something? Come hang out with me for a couple of years. I'll teach you something." And he was right. I ultimately left that company to come move to Florida, but I had an opportunity to run the sales office in a media company for several years up there with both he there and the woman who ran that part of the company. And there's no doubt. I mean, there's no doubt, right, that I learned a lot more being practically involved in my business. Another great piece of advice that it took me a long time. I knew it, I forgot it, and then I learned it again. So the company that I joined ultimately here in Orlando, that I said I was with 18 years and we exited. The CEO founder there, who's still a mentor of mine, who I've now known for over 25 years, he would constantly preach, particularly as we were growing and changing and roles were changing. He had a mantra that if you take care of the business will ultimately take care of you. So never put yourself in front of the business. And I think particularly in a scale company, it goes to my point before about entrepreneurs. It was really great advice, because the minute your ego or what you want from the business becomes counterproductive to what the business needs, that becomes rather problematic. Yeah. And later on in the business, after we were sold to private equity, there were clearly some changes that need to happen in the business. We were it's a long story, but we were pivoting into a new vertical. So it was the premise upon which we had really sold the company. We had just been entered into, but now needed to move more seriously in it to get us to the next level. And it was a very difficult transition for me personally, because on the one hand, we had been very successful. Getting from, we've like 3x the company in about 18 months.
Oh, yeah, it was several thousand employees that you had built up.
At the end, but in that period specifically, which is when we did our first exit or to our private equity company, we'd grown almost 3x in a year and a half. So it's very difficult for you then to sort of think about the next leg of the journey and how your role might have to change in it. Because it's right from an ego perspective, it is completely counterintuitive. Well, what do you mean? It's triple the company. And it was really only when I started to get that voice back in my head, and frankly also realized how much of my personal net worth was tied up into the success of this entity. Not just the success of me, but the success of this entity. and our ability to now get it, now being private equity owned, to get it to the next transaction, that you sort of had to revamp your thinking. And it has taught me now, as sort of someone who's coaching other entrepreneurs, ego is a very powerful tool that can be a wonderful motivator, but can also be very, very dangerous. And so you need to manage around that, which is why I talk a lot about flexibility and humility and a lot of those things.
Yeah.
And you tend not to know that until you get whacked. You get whacked.
Yes.
Around it.
Yeah. That if you get knocked around, you learn quick.
For sure. Yeah.
The next section, Rob, I'm going to ask you some quick questions. Whatever comes to your head is the right answer. We're just going to go fast through it to get to know you a little better. Who do you think is the best entrepreneur ever?
So the first name that came to mind was Mike Bloomberg, and maybe because he had sort of that public persona as well. So I'm going to do Mike Bloomberg.
Sure. If you could meet any historical figure for a meal and ask them any question, who would you want to meet and what would you ask them?
It would probably be Thomas Jefferson. And I really would like him to understand a lot of the contradictions in his thinking. He is someone who
put him on the spot there.
I would like to, because I don't think anybody, I think he was a confused guy around a lot of things, and obviously a brilliant guy, but I think he was different time, right? So people didn't air their sort of angst around some of these contradictions, but clearly there was a guy who was wrestling.
Another deeper conversation here, Rob.
I'd have to know. Come on, tell me really what you're.
Right.
Come on, what do you really think about some of these things?
Sounds like it's a longer, interesting conversation that maybe we'll plan at some other time.
Well, maybe if AI keeps going the way it is, maybe I can have that conversation with
yes. Biggest concern you have about the state of the world right now?
Candidly, I tend to think more about things closer to home than the world.
So state of Orange County.
Yeah, this is a place of enormous potential, and I do worry about missed potential. To me is somewhat tragic to me. And so I still worry that this community will not become what it really has an opportunity to be, given its vibrancy, its diversity, its youth, its creativity, because of just some of the broader issues in our community. I'll give you more of a world. I'll give you more of a world one. I do worry a little bit that our politics is currently rewarding the loudest people instead of the most thoughtful people. It's why people ask me about running for office again, and I'm just not a loud, angry guy. So I just don't know how I don't know how I fit, and so that bothers me more than anything else. That you cannot, in politics or even a lot of places, you can't have a serious conversation about most things. People kind of want to yell their one or two talking points and not listen to the other side. And I don't. Again, this maybe is coming from the business world, Sandeep. How do you solve problems that way? I'm used to being in rooms where people can have different views, but at the end of the day, they're trying to solve a problem. I don't know how you solve problems when you just don't.
Everybody's talking
cross
purposes all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. Sad. Well, we are at the end of our half an hour here. What is brand Rob Panepinto in your own words?
I think it is someone who in everything that he focuses his energy on is trying to move others forward, particularly entrepreneurs. That is really what charges me, to help an entrepreneur move their idea forward, to make this a better place. That's what I want to be part of.
There you have it. Rob, the brand that we spoke with today, moving the world forward by helping entrepreneurs build out that world. Thank you so much for talking to us, Rob.
Thanks, Sandeep. You said it better than I did. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.